Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello. So I got invited to, I met Kimberly at the end of last year over in San Francisco, and she invited me to come and speak here and talk really about how new technologies in mobile can open up new markets. Talking mainly about sort of our company, but also kind of what we're able to collect and kind of how that can create new industries, I suppose. So, firstly, where do I point this?
There you go.
Okay, firstly, a little bit about, sort of one will be about myself, two about the original industry, three about the past and NavMe 2.3, four about the present and NavMe 3.0, and then I'll talk about the future as well, where we're going, but also where we see future markets. So firstly, a bit about myself. I joined NavMe about 4 years ago. We were a startup. We didn't have many users. And yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I actually met Peter, the CEO, while I was trying to plant a church in East London. So faith is pretty much my number one priority. Secondly, I got married last year, so that's also a very big priority in my life. And then kind of the area in which I live, so kind of being in Hoxton, which is kind of Silicon Roundabout, there's a lot going on, and I really want to represent sort of the residents there. So that's the main priority in my life, and then this really comes second. But I've always been fascinated by technology. I've always been kind of fascinated by the future. At university, I started an e-commerce company which started to sell thousands and thousands of products. And when I met Peter and he told me about his vision for this navigation application, I got excited and kind of got on board. And now today I manage partnerships for NavMe all around the world with a number of different companies, and it's a fascinating experience. This picture was taken about 3 weeks ago where I managed to go to Google and kind of meet the team of Google X. My title originally was Chief Evangelist, and that was because I met Peter while I was planting a church, and so I wanted to keep evangelism in the title. It's great to know that Google X guys, some of their job titles are just adventurer, and so they've kind of got just as random job titles as kind of I did. Today I'm now business development, so not so exciting. So first of all, opening up new markets, which was the title. When we started, navigation on mobile was, what do I describe? It was kind of a P&D space. It didn't really exist on the mobile phone. So we kind of looked at that and kind of built a product. So in 2013, there have been 1 billion navigation or mapping applications, and we're part of that. So that's radical in the sense that it's already changed the P&D market. Smartphone navigation dominates that navigation market. So it's about to stand at about, going into 2018, we're looking at kind of it taking up 88% of the market. So the P&D market is pretty much being wiped out. The number of smartphones continues to increase. We all know these stats. 1.6 billion by 2017. I think we're talking about 1.87 billion by 2018. Some really interesting numbers, and it just creates a bigger market for us to do interesting stuff in navigation. And there are a limited number of navigation companies. A lot of these navigation companies are being consolidated by the bigger boys, is the way I'd like to describe it. There are now 26 navigation companies worldwide, and those numbers are decreasing as the bigger companies really try to get those mapping and navigation skills. The bigger players on mobile aren't experimenting, I guess, at the rate that we believe we are because there are higher risks involved. And so the risk that we're willing to take as a kind of a startup organization allows us to do some innovative stuff. So the past. Originally, we were one of the first free navigation apps on the iPhone and on Android in the UK market. We used crowdsourced map data, so it was, I guess, radical at the time to use OpenStreetMaps mixed with kind of A&D data to provide a navigation solution. People thought that the map data wouldn't be sufficient or good enough, but we still decided to launch a product, and we seemed to gain quite a large traction of users because of doing that, because we used the word free. We were initially called NavFree. And all of that was pure organic growth, zero marketing, just kind of PR. The way to describe that today is we're now still sort of chart leading in a number of markets, obviously after Google, but we're kind of top 10 in category now in 104 markets on the Android store and 15 countries on the App Store. So, and an average 4-star review. And that was all onboard map data. So that's currently how we used to look as a navigation app. And these are kind of the stats. It's always important to get into stats when we start to talk about data. I've heard data mentioned so many times today, and that's kind of what we're all about. So yeah, you talk about kind of users. So I give you a headline figure of kind of 22.8 million. But what does that really mean, all-time registered devices? Kind of what does a current install base, so who's updating our application, so who's updated it recently? We've only launched the new version in the last couple of weeks, so the data's still pretty kind of fresh, but we're kind of talking about 10.7 million that have updated to the latest version. We're talking active, so how many people are using it very regularly? So we're talking around sort of 1.76 million users. This is February data, so in the summer you're talking double this level when you talk about active users, because everybody uses navigation and mapping technologies during the summer months. And then average kind of app ratings is 4-star. And how much data are we collecting? Well, we know that our audience are driving around 25 to 26 million miles every month. That was last month. And then how many sessions are they using, each user using per month? So we're talking about 5 sessions per day for those users. So it's pretty good numbers. And then when it comes to local search, which I know that you guys are pretty much focused on, the search numbers don't look huge here, but we're not properly measuring search at the moment. So at the moment, that's kind of 2.2, so that's how many people we know are kind of going on the search screen, but we're not measuring kind of how many searches they're making when they're going into that. So we were doing some of that last month, and well, a couple of months ago, and it was around the 6 million, 7 million figure. And then where do we feel like we've got critical mass? And what do we describe as critical mass for a mapping navigation application? So you're talking about kind of how many people are sort of driving and how much of the world can we map. So in the UK, we pretty much map every single road in this country 46 times a month, which is quite a lot of data. So we're starting to collect quite a huge amount, and you're starting to see where our user base are. So you're starting to see information coming from the UK, US, Germany, Italy. We're in 40, well, we've got 40 apps in the marketplace, and we're pretty much in kind of 80+ countries. So the present, and this is kind of talking a bit more about where we are today. So we launched 2 weeks ago the new version. We're starting to see fresh data. So we changed our name from NavFree to NavMe, and we kind of did a really big update. So let's talk about that. So NavMe Free is really about traffic and social map reports. So it's kind of talking about kind of getting the user community moving. And all our company is about getting that community going. So we kind of got a brand new UI which really fits in with kind of iOS 8. And that kind of really includes kind of live maps showing the users as well. So really showing the communities there. So everybody can see everybody else on the map. So you can start to talk about community, which some people may describe as kind of Waze-like. That's why we kind of say we're Waze meets Runkeeper. You kind of got a NavMe driver community there. So they're sharing incident reports with each other as well. So in the first 2 weeks, we started to see 10,000 user reports every single week at the moment. So those numbers are still improving as well. We kind of got, so traffic avoidance systems. So traffic used to be something that people paid for, and it used to be something that you'd have to get the professional maps to kind of supply. Now we kind of get that all from the community, so that doesn't need to exist in certain markets as well. So we use pro map data, but we also use sort of free map data from the community too. And we're now in pretty much most markets where OSM is sufficient. And then finally, you talked about driver profile. So what kind of data do we collect, and and now we're showing that data back to the user base. So this is something that we launched in the last sort of 2 weeks, and it's kind of driver safety score and information. So you're starting to collect more information, and let me just kind of share with you sort of some of the data that we collect. So we're now collecting kind of lat-long information, X and Y kind of axle points, sort of heading angles, really good, rich, raw data. And we're starting to turn that into derived data. So showing the user kind of their information and what they can do with that. And so you're starting to see this, and that's kind of why we're seeing the uptake from people using it 3.2 times a month to the 5 times a month that they are now. So this is kind of giving you a bit of the stats. So this is just 2 weeks, so it's pretty fresh, but today I've seen some extraordinary growth. So you're seeing kind of users using it 53% more when they're using it on a daily basis, and they're starting to, average monthly active users has gone up 72%, and we're starting to see more and more of that happening. So talking about new markets and mobile, and that's what we're here about. So we collect billions of GPS data points a month. And we use that for a number of different industries, but it can also apply to a wide variety of industries. So one for global traffic, global map trace data using generated map and instant reports, really understanding a global driver profile kind of behavior situation. So for example, we'll be able to start creating reports about which countries have the fastest drivers, which countries kind of have the most accidents, I guess, or kind of moving along that way. We've also started to do innovative partnerships. So I don't know if you guys have heard of like What3Words. We integrated them in recently as well. So we've got a good user presence in the likes of India, and so address search is very difficult there. So what we started to do is we thought, okay, we'll work with this interesting sort of startup too. And so they kind of created a grid of sort of 57 trillion 3 meter by 3 meter kind of squares. And so now everybody has an address that they can search to. So that's kind of one of the things that we started to do. So everyone everywhere now has an address. And then kind of coming into search for ourselves. So initially we kind of focused on aggregated search. So I guess we give the consumers what they want. So we work with Google, we work with Foursquare, we've kind of worked with TripAdvisor, and we also allow people to see their own contacts. They collect all that information, they can drive to their friends as well. So all of that kind of stuff is in there, so click to nav. But we're now starting to build our own search capabilities in-house too. So what's next? So this is kind of talking about the future of NavMe and our company, but where we kind of see the world going when it comes to this space. So our focus is really on the US and Europe and a few emerging markets. We really want to grow our user base, kind of attract 20 million new users over the next I think 8 months, and so we can have and try and get an installed user base of around 40 million. And now, why is that important? Well, we want to be sort of collecting 784 million miles a month. If we can get to that figure, there's some really interesting data there, and these are the reasons why. So, mobile again, creating brand new markets. Well, if we can collect that amount of data, if any app can collect that amount of data, then you start to see real-time traffic data for all major road networks, and you can crowdsource that information. You can start to kind of create real-time map data, so you can create your own map, which is great, and then we can start to map the world about 12 times a month. Then you kind of have search as well, so you can start to work with a number of different search organizations and kind of create millions of kind of S&B relationships. And then insurance, we'll be one of the biggest players potentially in the insurance space as well, when it comes to global accident data, global drive behavior information. We'll be then analyzing 2.4 billion trips per month, and then we'll be analyzing more than 1.4 million accidents. So really kind of getting deep into that data layer. What I see right now in the marketplace is a real transition happening, and especially in transportation. So over the last year especially, I've kind of seen consumers demanding connectivity. We've been approached numerous times by a number of different OEMs when it comes to integration into the car, but nobody knows who's going to win the race just yet. What we're seeing is Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, MirrorLink being predominantly the ones that are going to be connecting the car, and that's kind of how search is going to happen. What we're starting to see as well is that people are demanding shared vehicle use, and so we're seeing obviously the likes of Uber and Zipcar and various others kind of increasing too. And so kind of moving into that world makes a lot of sense. But in San Francisco, one of the great things that we see is new corporations are entering. So there's a lot more capital out there to really experiment with our data set and with other people's data. So the likes of Nokia, Intel, Verizon, and various other firms are putting hundreds of millions or billions of pounds into the marketplace, which allows companies like us to experiment with that data set, and whether that be around search or insurance or other areas. Just to give you an idea when it comes to navigation and search, 35 plus companies have now based themselves in Silicon Valley. From Ford to Alpine, Daimler, Bosch, the list is pretty much endless, and they've kind of got large audience and large teams out there. The main two things about mobile and where the new market is heading is around connectivity and kind of autonomy. It's been mentioned numerous times here today too. And there's now kind of an investor appetite to really put large amounts of money into experimentation around kind of different companies that have good sets of data. You're seeing companies like Uber, for example, that raised sort of $5.9 billion in funding to date with a $40 billion valuation. you kind of have companies as well like Lyft. I think earlier this week raised another 300 or so million, or million. So now kind of raised 862.5. You companies kind of like with Mobileye, where you're talking about ADAS and kind of advanced driver sort of assistance type programs, which kind of comes into search too, kind of IPOing for $5 billion. And then companies like Waze, kind of raising $64 million from the likes of Blue Run. And so there's an appetite for investors really to just experiment with data sets, to really kind of do some interesting stuff, and allowing companies like ourselves to grow, experiment, and see what may sort of go in the future. And I guess that's what I see when I look at mobile and kind of how it may open up new markets. It's the amount of data that we can collect and the quantity of it and what we may be able to do with it. And that's pretty much me.
Great.
I hope that helps.
Have a seat. So as a parent, the first thing I thought about was the opportunity to measure how fast my son and daughter are driving the car. So I thought if I could embed this app on their phones and know whether they were exceeding the speed limit, that would be a good thing to know. So is that, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that, use the mic, please.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
So when it comes to a parent, for example, and understanding that information, that will be provided on a dashboard so they start to see all of those stats around their children. So that's one of the areas in which we're kind of moving into, and we're lucky that we're able to experiment with, I guess, 2 million people on a regular monthly basis.
So you want to get to 40 million downloads, which means you'll get active users of 4 million?
So
is that the math?
10
to 1?
It's kind of the maths when it comes to the industry and what we're doing, yes. So
how many of you have ever downloaded this app? 1, 2? Oh, so look, you got some users out there. Paul, is it good?
Yeah.
Yeah? What's that?
Very good.
Very good. Look at that.
So I think that what you're starting to see is the amount of data when we get to certain regions, though, becomes really valuable for search. So what we'll be able to start doing, maybe working with some partners here, is we could say, well, this many people have driven past your shop or past your store. And so rather than just targeting people hoping that they may be there,
sure,
we can start to do some of that.
And you know that they have a repeat pattern, then you target them even more precisely.
Yeah.
Questions from the audience? Come on. No questions from the audience. There we go. James. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Neil.
You're welcome.
So just because we're all here obviously interested in monetizing the local search space in that sense, it would be, and you've just mentioned this point about letting potential customers know about people driving past. It would be interesting to understand, just talk a little bit more about the example there, the experience of, say, a shop or a business. When you're doing navigation, obviously interrupting them with an advert while they try and drive down the street is one thing. Can you talk a little bit about an ROI or an experience which you're planning to help us to provide that to an SME customer?
Sure. So some of this stuff is in the future and isn't just yet. So when it comes
everything we talk about is in the future here. Come on.
Yeah. So, but when it comes to kind of driving past the shop, I mean, we can create a platform right now which really just tells you how many drivers are kind of in the vicinity. But you may not be able to, we won't target anybody while somebody's driving. We don't think that's a driver distraction, and it's just not going to happen. But what you can do at the beginning of a trip is you can start to advertise to them if you know that they kind of take the same patterns. But at the same time, you can also advertise to them at the end. So that's kind of the idea when it comes to that.
So how would you distinguish the sort of your functionality versus Waze?
I think when it comes to, well, Waze is a great competitor, and they raised a huge amount of money and are now kind of sucked up by Google.
Yeah.
In Europe, we have a good user base and a relative quality, sort of a good quality user base. In a lot of markets, we have more users than Waze, which would surprise a huge amount of people. And I guess kind of when it comes into giving the data back to the user is really what we're trying to do, which is probably different to them.
Okay. Any other questions? There's a question. There's one right behind you.
Hey, so you have so many usage on your free nav. You also offering like a paid app. Can you talk about the conversion and how you are bringing users from the free to the paid app?
No, we don't have a paid app anymore. So we used to have a paid app. That doesn't exist anymore. So we've changed. So there was NavMe and there was NavFree. NavMe was a paid application which generated good sums of money originally. But now we've purely moved to a free model because what we're trying to do is just grow that user base and kind of grow the data that we're able to collect.
And how are you going about getting new users? What's sort of your strategy? Because that's always hard for folks.
Yeah, I think for us, it's not so much about right now when it comes to sort of acquiring new users. We're not focusing on that. So every month we get around sort of 800,000 to 1 million sort of new downloads anyway. And that's not because we're trying to acquire new users. That's simply because we're stuck at the top of the App Store.
Yep. So then the question is how to get the users who download it to use it.
So, they are downloading a certain quantity.
Yeah.
The question is if we're trying to get more users to download. That's something that we're not totally focused on right now because we think we're going to hit that 40 million figure. Not really as a problem. I think what we're trying to work out is stickiness because what people care about, especially in the Valley, is not how many users you have. It's not how many downloads. It's how active they are, how many sessions they're making, and that's what we're focused on.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. That was terrific, Craig. And